Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most interesting Sony games I've played in a very long time. I find myself being indecisive about my point of view on it. Do I love it, or do I just think it's pretty good? When it first came out, I loved it. I thought the combat was just fantastic with its variety of abilities, the combat stances that created so much depth, and was excellently married with a wide range of unique enemies to create something that is near endlessly replayable. Not to mention the beautiful visuals, or the delicate score, or the splendid feeling of exploration that Tsushima provided. But as I went into my second playthrough, I began to notice the cracks in the design work. Firstly, Jin became increasingly uninteresting as his range as a character started and stopped at Honor. While Jin is thematically fitting and mirrors the inspirations that brought this world to life, he doesn't make for a charismatic lead to follow for tens of hours of gameplay. Worst, however, was the repetitive side mission design and dialogue writing that became a real slog for me to get through. This is why Ghost of Tsushima is interesting to me. In essence, its gameplay elements are some of the best I've ever played, and its open world is one that I'll never get bored of exploring. But its writing of characters, mission design, and handling of Jin really disappointed me, as Sucker Punch was so close to greatness. The reason why I'm telling you all this is so you can gauge what I think about the Iki Island expansion and why I enjoyed it as much as I did, considering it's more of what you've already played. So how does Ghost of Tsushima's Iki Island expansion hold up in light of all this? Well, like I just mentioned, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a fantastic and welcomed addition to the base game, as it feels like a core piece of Jin's journey and a story that needed to be told. If there's one central element to take away from all this, it's that this isn't just a reason to play more Ghost of Tsushima, and it certainly isn't a piece of tacked on DLC. Okay, that's enough of the introduction stuff. Let's get into the details of Iki Island and the director's cut. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe leave me a like and consider subscribing. Okay, so before we get into the details about the story, gameplay, open world structure, and so on, let me cover all of the boring stuff, aka the upgrading process, because yeah, it's very confusing. So, on August 20th, Ghost of Tsushima had a director's cut released on PS4 and PS5. The Iki Island expansion brings a new playable area to explore, a new campaign, new side missions, and more open world activities are bundled with the director's cut. Meaning if you want to play Iki Island, you'll first need to buy the Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut or upgrade to the Director's Cut for 20 USD or 30 Australian dollars. Upgrading is available to anyone who already owns the base game. Where this gets more confusing is if you have a PS5 and want to play the PS5 version, you'll need to buy a separate upgrade for 10 USD or 15 Australian dollars because upgrading to the Director's Cut does not give you access to the next gen version. The PS5 upgrade brings a few new additions such as adaptive triggers, haptic feedback support, faster load times, and native 4K resolution. It's important to note that if you're coming from PS4 to PS5, you do not need to upgrade to get access to 60 FPS, as Sucker Punch patched this into the game for free at the beginning of the year. One more update also released alongside the Director's Cut and PS5 version. It's free to everyone and it adds features like a lock-on button, additional button remapping, allowing you to change attack from square and triangle to R1 and R2. It's a nice addition for sure, but not something I could get comfortable with, and also the ability to hide your quiver during gameplay. Okay, so that's a lot of trivial information that honestly will confuse the average consumer. Personally, I think this upgrade model should have been streamlined, giving anyone who bought the Director's Cut or upgraded to the Director's Cut a free upgrade to the PS5 version, rather than having them fork out an additional $15. Now, do I think the PS5 version is worth upgrading to? Well, no, not really. The add-ons are nice and I do really enjoy the DualSense implementations, but considering the upgrade cost is half of the price of the Iki Island expansion, it doesn't really give me much confidence to recommend it. Furthermore, if you add the Iki Island expansion and the PS5 upgrade cost together, you get a total price point that is at least 50% of the original price of the base game. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that a new area that adds 10 hours of gameplay and some controller features is comparable to the 30-hour adventure that the base game offers. Does any of this mean you shouldn't buy or upgrade to the Director's Cut? Of course not, as I'm sure the introduction of this video made explicitly obvious. Iki Island sees Jin journey to a new island off the coast of Tsushima, after he hears rumours of a new fleet of Mongols causing havoc. The head of this new Mongol faction is known as the Crow, a meticulous, calculated and malevolent being who prefers to poison her victims rather than murder them, a far cry from the Khan in the base game. And this is what happens to Jin at the outset of this new campaign. He is quickly captured and poisoned, causing him to hallucinate and relive the darkest moments of his life. At this moment in the expansion, it became abundantly clear to me that Iki Island is far more about Jin's personal relationships and mental state than it is about the people and mythos of Iki Island, which is something I was critical of in the base game. Jin has a lot more to do here on a personal level, as he comes to terms with his father's death and what it means to be a part of Clan Sakai, as this story harshly criticizes his family heritage. And I loved that. In 45 minutes of gameplay, Iki Island fixed one of my biggest disappointments with Ghost of Tsushima, namely, Jin doesn't feel like a hollow character anymore, and they keep this interesting story beat alive for the entire runtime. Having Jin also hallucinate while exploring the open world and engaging in side missions. The way this has been handled reminded me a lot of how God of War handled its side missions, instead of the conventional approach to side content as being exactly that, content that is disconnected or shares very little with the main story. Instead, Jin's personal struggles continue during every part of your journey. No matter what you're doing, Jin can and will see visions of the prominent figures he's looked up to in his life. And because of how crucial this expansion is to Jin's character, I really have to question why this is available to players who reach Act 2. The story reveals, and just the way they handle the hallucinations, will honestly spoil the base game story, and most likely ring hollow for anyone who hasn't gone through that original story arc. So for anyone who hasn't finished Ghost of Tsushima, do that first, and then play Iki Island. I think it's best experienced that way. So, if Iki Island has helped make Jin a far more engaging protagonist and someone that I'm actually excited to play as again, which is not something I could say after finishing the main campaign. Okay, well, what about my second issue, repetitive mission design and the writing of dialogue? Unfortunately, this aspect has been cut from the same cloth, with very little to no variation from Tsushima. Side missions still range from go there and investigate that crime scene, go here and save my family from Mongols, please help me as everyone in my town has been murdered. And the writing still sounds and feels the same. Every side character has no personality and speaks in the same tone. It's disappointing that Sucker Punch couldn't find a way to add more variety and interesting characters, but hey, maybe they'll fix this in the next game. Something that is more interesting, even if I don't love the additions, are the two, I want to say, minor changes to gameplay. The first is really cool. You now have the ability to charge at your enemies on horseback, practically KOing anyone that dares stand in your way. Admittedly, I didn't use this too often as I would tend to forget it even existed, but the handful of times I did use it, I was glad I could. Secondly is the new type of enemy on Iki Island, the Shamans. You'll first be introduced to these new foes quite early on, and they'll constantly pop up throughout the rest of the expansion. The Shamans will stand at the back of the battlefield and chant a song, buffing all surrounding enemies, causing them to spam their most powerful, unblockable attacks, in addition to having extra health and more poise. Essentially, while the Shamans are alive, every enemy becomes a mini-boss, meaning you are more or less forced to rush the Shaman and forget about anything else until you've taken care of them. In theory, these are interesting enemies, and I'll never say no to more enemy variety. After all, Sekiro is one of my favourite games of all time. But I feel like the Shamans do more harm than good here, because like I mentioned a moment ago, they force you to prioritize them, which takes out a lot of strategy or freedom in the bigger battles. It simply just isn't effective enough to go about battles any other way if and when a Shaman is buffing enemies. They aren't a big deal and don't hurt the DLC that much, and to be completely transparent, if a new enemy type wasn't added to the DLC, I'd be here complaining about that too. Last but not least, what does Iki Island offer up in terms of content and open world additions? First of all, this expansion will run you around 4 hours or so if you rush through the campaign. It will take you an additional 2 or 3 hours to do most of the side content and some open world stuff, and it took me 10 hours to 100% everything on the island, minus the collectibles like scrolls and banners. You've still got the same open world activities you've come to know, such as bamboo to test your sword skills, hot springs to relax in, environmental traversal challenges, bandit camps to clear out, and so I'm sure you get the picture. The few additions here are minor but welcome. You now have an archery minigame where you get scored by the amount of time it takes you to hit all 7 targets. There's a side activity where you play the flute to tame an animal, where you need to tilt the controller to keep the little green orb inside the lines. And also a sparring ring where you verse 4 different opponents that all have unique fighting styles, making them their own puzzle you need to solve. Okay, so that's all of the content you get in the Iki Island expansion. Overall, Ghost of Tsushima remains one of the best open worlds to explore, with a wealth of fun and creative minigames, a relaxing and sophisticated score, and some of the best visuals of all time. Iki Island is more of the same of what the original game offered up, and to some that might be a disappointment, but I really enjoyed what I played, and honestly this is a welcome surprise as I thought I had played everything Ghost of Tsushima had to offer. Iki Island was a joy to explore with wonderfully realised locations, a gorgeous colour palette, some fantastic siege encounters, and the best character development with Jin's internal battle we've seen thus far. I'd say this is easily the best Ghost of Tsushima content if it wasn't for the unexciting and by the numbers side missions. Lack of original ideas with the side characters, and the feeling of retreading old ideas. Nevertheless, I absolutely loved jumping back into Ghost of Tsushima and experiencing new content and just exploring and playing around with the combat system. Between the base game, this DLC and the free Legends mode, Ghost of Tsushima is one incredibly attractive package that I can recommend to everyone. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Iki Island, and now I eagerly await Ghost of Tsushima 2 more than I ever have.